Under the cold white light of the shuttle bay, Mara Vance stepped off the transport ramp and into a sea of stairs. The Apex Warrior Academy's hangar stretched wider than a starship cradle, its black steel walls lined with banners from a dozen worlds. Armored cadets towered over her, their eyes, whether slitted, faceted, or triple-lidded, tracking her every move. She adjusted the strap of her duffel and kept her posture straight, though her gut churned. They looked like predators measuring prey. A tall figure in crimson armor stalked toward her. His exoskeleton gleamed under the lights, the plating etched with claw marks that might have been ceremonial or earned. "Human," he said, voice deep enough to hum in her bones. "You are the experiment." Mara resisted the urge to smirk. "Cadet Vance, reporting as ordered." He tilted his head, insectal mandibles shifting. "We will see if you live long enough to earn a name here." Without another word, he turned, expecting her to follow. They crossed the bay into the Academy's central hall. The air smelled faintly metallic, like blood drying on a blade. Everywhere, cadets trained, some locked in duels, others hefting weights that would crush a human spine. She caught a flash of surprise in one warrior's eyes when she didn't flinch at the sight of a sparring match ending with a blade driven through a chest plate. The loser rose seconds later, armor auto-sealing the wound. The Apex healed quickly, but that didn't mean they played softly. The crimson-armored officer stopped before a towering figure whose armor was matte black and unadorned, except for the row of polished teeth set into the collar. His eyes were pale gold and utterly still. "Commander Rask," the officer said. "The human is here." Rask looked her over without expression. "You volunteered for this?" "I applied." "You accepted," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You are small, fragile, slow," Rask said. "If you survive the month, it will be because the others chose not to kill you in training. They may not choose so." Mara had heard worse. She only said, "Then I'll make myself too interesting to kill." The faintest twitch ghosted across Rask's mouth, though it could have been disdain. "We will begin." Training started before she'd been shown her quarters. The first drill was a gauntlet, running the length of the battle pit while dodging stun blasts from a dozen elevated shooters. Apex cadets bounded the distance in seconds. Mara ducked, rolled, used cover, and, when an energy pulse grazed her side, bit down on the pain and kept moving. She crossed last, but upright. The next was close combat. Her opponent was a reptilian cadet with forearms thicker than her thighs. He came at her like a battering ram. She sidestepped, jabbed at his flank, swept his leg when he overextended. The crowd roared when she drove her elbow into the back of his neck, but the referee barked a foul. Apex rules forbade strikes to dishonorable zones. She was ordered to repeat the match, and this time the reptilians slammed her into the sand until her ribs felt cracked. By nightfall, she was bruised from collarbone to ankle. In the mess hall, she ate alone. Conversations around her were loud and guttural, punctuated by the thump of armored fists on tables. Every so often, she felt eyes on her, measuring, dismissing, maybe planning. On the third day, the incident happened. She faced a senior cadet in a weapons drill. The blade was blunted, meant to simulate combat without lethal risk. He was faster, stronger, but reckless. Mara used that. She feigned a stumble, drew him in, and hooked his leg. When he went down, she slammed the flat of her blade against his helmet, hard enough to ring metal. The crowd went silent. The senior cadet rose slowly, his mandibles twitching. "You mocked me, soft skin. You left yourself open," she said. It was the wrong answer. His snarl was almost a laugh. "Let us see how open you are." He swung at her outside the drill's boundaries, and she had to use both hands to block. She might have been flattened if Rask hadn't appeared, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "That is enough." The senior cadet backed off, but his gaze promised there would be another time. 2 hours later, Mara was summoned to the commander's chamber. Rask stood by the window, looking out at the Academy's training grounds. "You humiliated a veteran," he said. "I won a match. You won by abandoning honor. Apex warriors fight with strength and pride. You fight to win. That's the point, isn't it? For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Rask keyed a command into the wall console. A schematic lit the air, a vast, labyrinthine structure surrounded by what looked like energy walls. "The training vault," he said. She'd heard whispers in the mess hall. A proving ground older than the academy itself. Inside were simulations and constructs designed to push an apex warrior to the limit, and kill anything weaker. Survival for 3 days was a mark of greatness. No human had ever entered. None had ever been invited. "You will enter tomorrow at first light," Rask said. She searched his face for mockery and found none. "Why?" "To settle the matter. If you survive, they will respect you. If you do not, your experiment ends quickly." "And if I win?" she asked. Rask's pale eyes didn't blink. "No one wins the vault." That night, in her quarters, Mara sat on her bunk and stared at the wall. Her bruises throbbed with every breath. The vault wasn't a test. It was an execution wrapped in ceremony. She thought about Earth, about the wars her people had fought not because they were stronger, but because they refused to be erased. She didn't plan to survive. She planned to finish. Morning came too soon. The vault's entrance was a gaping black mouth in the academy's lowest level. Crowds filled the observation tiers above, their voices a rising, hungry growl. Mara wore light armor, stripped of the heavier plating given to apex warriors. In her hands, a short combat blade. No ranged weapon. A horn blared, deep enough to vibrate in her chest. The blast doors ground open, metal shrieking. Cold air washed over her, smelling faintly of ozone. A shadow moved in the darkness ahead, massive and deliberate. Then it stepped into the light. The Apex King's armor was the color of scorched iron, its surface etched with patterns that might have been scars. Its helmet was faceless, a smooth plate of black, and in its hands was a weapon too large for her to lift. It did not speak. It only turned fully toward her, and in that motion, she understood it was already certain of her death. The doors clanged shut behind her. The vault swallowed her in silence. The Apex King moved first. One moment it stood in the shadows, the next it was a blur of blackened armor and steel. Mara flung herself sideways as its blade bit into the stone floor, carving a molten groove where she'd been standing. Heat radiated from the weapon, not just a cutting edge but a field meant to slice through armor and bone in a single stroke. Her breath came fast in the cold air, every inhale tasting faintly of metal and ash. The vault was bigger than she'd imagined, vaulted corridors branching into darkness, walls alive with faintly shifting light. The king advanced without hurry, each footstep thudding like a countdown. Mara backed toward a narrow archway. Its bulk would have to slow to enter, and she could use that. She waited until it lunged again, then darted through. Sparks sprayed as the king's weapon scraped the arch. The gap bought her seconds, not safety. The corridor twisted into a dim chamber where alien flora pulsed faintly in the dark. Vines hung from the ceiling like coiled snakes. The air was warmer here, damp with some acrid scent. Mara crouched behind a jagged pillar and listened. The king's steps were deliberate, unhurried. It didn't need to rush. It believed the vault would do its work. She tested her blade's balance, and thought about what Rask had said, no one wins the vault. She wasn't aiming for a win, not in their terms. She needed a way to cut the king down, and that meant finding a weakness. Strength wasn't her weapon. Time was. When the king entered, it didn't hesitate. It cleaved through the vines and shattered the pillar she'd hidden behind. She rolled clear and darted into another passage, its footsteps echoing behind her. The map she'd memorized from stolen glimpses of training files was useless here. Walls shifted, layouts changed. The vault was alive. Minutes bled into hours. The king drove her forward, never tiring, never slowing. She found water in a shallow basin, bitter but drinkable. Food was harder. She tore strips from a leathery fungus clinging to a wall, forcing it down. Every choice carried a risk. Some vault flora could kill in minutes, but starvation was slower. Once, she found herself in a chamber filled with statues of apex warriors, each carved in a triumphant stance. Dust coated them. As she passed, one statue shifted. Not a statue, an automaton, its plating dulled with age. It lunged. She dodged, letting it crash into another, then used their tangled limbs as cover. Behind her, she heard the king enter, slicing through both machines without breaking stride. She began to notice patterns. The king's strikes always flowed from the same guard positions, its footwork precise but unvaried. It had no need to adapt, until now. She tested it, baiting a swing high, then darting low. It adjusted a fraction slower than she expected. Not much, but enough to seed an idea. She set traps where she could, dislodging stone blocks to drop behind her, luring native predators into her path so they'd cross the king's. Once, a six-legged thing with a mouth like a saw blade leapt at her. She dove aside, and it slammed into the king's chest. Sparks flared where its teeth met armor, but the king ripped it apart in seconds. Still, she saw the faint scorch marks left behind. Not invincible. By the second day, her muscles screamed from constant movement. She'd slept in snatches, pressed into alcoves too small for the king to enter. She dreamed of open sky and woke to the sound of its footsteps. Hunger sharpened her mind into something cold and clear. She wasn't prey anymore. She was a hunter. She found the first real weapon in a collapsed corridor, an apex glaive, its blade chipped but still sharp. The shaft was too long for her frame, so she sawed it shorter, trading reach for maneuverability. With it, she could strike harder than with the combat knife, maybe even pierce the king's armor if she found the right spot. The next time they clashed, she didn't run. She met its charge in a tight bend, letting the walls limit its swing. Steel rang on steel as she parried, sparks painting the dark. The king's strength drove her backward, but she landed a glancing cut along its side. Not deep, but the armor's surface plating peeled, exposing darker metal beneath. It didn't bleed. But it could break. Pain became her companion. Her ribs ached from the first day's blows, her left hand numb from gripping the glaive too long. She ignored both. She learned the vault's rhythm, when its walls shifted, where its traps reset. She began steering their encounters toward places that favored her, narrow bridges over dark pits, low tunnels that forced the king to crouch. On the fourth day, she sprang a trap she'd been building for hours. Luring the king into a chamber thick with explosive gas from ruptured pods, she struck flint against stone. The air ignited in a blossom of fire. She was thrown back, ears ringing, vision spotted white. When she staggered up, the king was still standing, but scorched, part of its armor warped. The fight that followed was desperate. Her blade slipped into the warped gap, sinking inches before the king tore it free and flung it aside. She grabbed the combat knife and slashed at the same spot, forcing the gap wider. The king struck her across the chest with the flat of its blade, sending her crashing into a wall. She couldn't breathe for a moment, lungs spasming. It didn't press the attack. It stepped back, watching her. She understood then, it had underestimated her at first. Now it was studying her, adapting. The advantage she'd carved out was closing. She limped into the next corridor, the king shadowing her from a distance. She could feel its presence, patient, certain. Every step was heavier, every breath harder, but her mind was sharper than it had been when she entered. She'd seen its patterns. She'd damaged it. She knew in her bones that she could kill it. The vault's walls shifted again, and she found herself in a vast circular chamber. The floor was cracked and uneven, pools of liquid metal gathering in the low places. Above, faint light streamed from vents high overhead. This felt different, like a stage. The king entered opposite her, its black armor glinting with the scars she'd given it. For the first time, it raised its blade in a salute before advancing. Mara tightened her grip on the knife. Her body was nearly finished, but her will was not. She had one more trap in mind, and if it worked, the king wouldn't walk out of this chamber. She stepped forward to meet it. The king closed the distance with the predator's patience, blade low, feet silent on the fractured stone. Mara circled, forcing herself to breathe evenly despite the hammering in her chest. Every muscle burned, her ribs ached with each inhale, and her legs threatened to give beneath her weight. None of that mattered now. This was the final hunt. She edged toward a fissure in the floor, a jagged scar where molten metal pulsed faintly below. Heat shimmered in the air above it. She had no chance overpowering the king directly, but she could make the vault's own hazards fight for her. When it lunged, she sidestepped, guiding its momentum toward the fissure. The black armor's weight cracked the stone, but it caught itself before falling through. Its weapon whirled in a vicious arc. She ducked low, feeling the rush of air as it missed her by inches, and countered with a slash at the weakened joint in its side. Sparks flared where steel met the exposed seam. The king pivoted, faster than something that massive should be, and struck her shoulder with the butt of its blade. Pain exploded down her arm. She stumbled back, clutching the knife in her offhand now, vision swimming. It advanced without pause. She retreated toward the chamber's far wall where a cluster of hanging chains dangled from the ceiling, remnants of some forgotten mechanism. With each step, she measured the king's reach, its rhythm, the fractional delay after its heaviest swings. When the next strike came, she didn't evade entirely. She let the flat of the blade clip her side, using the impact to spin her toward the chains. In one motion, she grabbed the lowest and yanked hard, breaking the rusted anchor overhead. The linked steel crashed down between them, tangling briefly with the king's weapon arm. She darted in, knife stabbing at the warped gap in its armor again. This time the blade sank deeper, grating against something solid inside. The king roared, not a mechanical sound, but something almost alive, before shoving her away. She hit the ground hard, lungs emptying in a violent gasp. It came for her then, abandoning measured steps for brutal force. She scrambled to her feet, backing toward the fissure once more. Each swing gouged the floor, molten light spilling from fresh cracks. Her mind counted down, 3 more steps, 2, 1, until she felt the heat on her heels. She baited a high swing and dropped to her knees, sliding forward under the arc. As she passed, she drove the knife upward into the exposed seam with all the strength she had left. The blade lodged deep. She left it there and rolled clear. The king staggered. Its weapon slipped from its grip, hitting the stone with a resonant clang. A hum built in its chest, growing into a shriek of stressed metal. Cracks spidered through the black armor, light bleeding from within. It reached for her, hand trembling, before the fissure beneath it widened and the floor gave way. The king fell into the molten glow below, its body breaking apart as it vanished into the heat. For a long moment, the chamber was silent but for the hiss of cooling stone. Mara stood unmoving, every muscle trembling. Her hands were empty now. Her ears rang. Slowly, she crossed the floor to where the king's weapon had fallen. The blade was too large for her, but she could lift its severed head, a scorched helmet, smooth and featureless, now cracked down the center. She gripped it under one arm. The vault's walls shifted again, but this time they opened into a long corridor flooded with light. She walked it without hurry. Her boots left smears of blood across the pale floor. When she emerged into the Academy's central arena, the crowd fell silent. Rows of Apex warriors stared down at her, their expressions unreadable. Some lowered their gazes. Others leaned forward as if to confirm they were seeing what they thought they saw. Rask stood at the front of the observation tier, his pale gold eyes locked on her. For the first time since she'd met him, he inclined his head. She let the helmet drop at his feet. The impact rang through the arena. "You said no one wins the vault?" she said, her voice raw. "No one has," Rask replied. His gaze shifted to the broken head. "Until now." She looked past him at the other cadets. "You build warriors for strength," she said. "Humans build survivors. Survivors end wars." No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any roar. Rask turned to the assembled ranks. "Remember this day. Remember her name." They didn't cheer. They didn't have to. The way they watched her as she walked from the arena told her everything. She wasn't prey anymore. She wasn't even just a warrior. She was a shift in the story they told themselves about what was possible. Her quarters were silent when she returned. She set the helmet in the corner, not as a trophy, but as a warning. Outside, the Academy would keep training, and the Dominion would keep waging its wars. But she had cracked their certainty, and cracks only widened with time. She lay back on her bunk, every bruise and cut pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Sleep came quickly. The image of the king's fall stayed with her, but not as a victory, more like a beginning. The vault was closed behind her. The next door, she knew, would open soon enough.